Let's go.
Yeah.
And we smoked it all again.
Okay, you are now listening to the Poptimist podcast, and today we have...
Adam Ayan from Gateway Mastering Studios.
And also...
Ned Lee.
My good friend Ned Lee. This is actually the first time me and Ned are going to be doing a podcast together. We've discussed it for a long time.
Cool. I'm glad I could be here with you guys.
Right. Yeah, Ned wanted to kind of kick things off today. You had a few questions to ask you, for starters.
Yeah, so to preface this, I have taken Adam's Recording 101 class. So, do you want to just give a brief introduction as to what you do for work?
Sure.
And, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm a mastering engineer here at Gateway Mastering Studios. I started here in 1998 as a production engineer, and by about 2000 became a mastering engineer here. And I've been developing clientele and mastering records ever since then, in the room that we're speaking in at the moment. The class that Ned speaks of is one of two classes that I teach at the University of Southern Maine School of Music. They're called Principles of Digital Audio and Music Production and Advanced Principles of Digital Audio and Music Production, which is a sort of a side gig for me that I really enjoy. I talk a lot at industry events where there's like AES or South by Southwest, things for the Grammys and things like that, and I really enjoy teaching, and there's such a great group of students and people that, faculty and people that are involved at the School of Music that I've been fortunate enough to do that for many years as well, since about 2001. But primarily I'm a mastering engineer, and I have clientele that ranges from indie artists to superstar artists and everything in between. My job is to make music sound the best that it possibly can, recorded music that is, sound the best that it possibly can. And I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really great artists, and whether it is indie or superstar and everything in between, whatever those words actually mean. My drive, my passion is working on recorded music, great music, whether it's something that, is an artist that's a household name, or some really cool indie artist that has a niche following. What gets me going and what gets me excited about what I do is just working on great music and being a part of the sonic presentation of great recorded music. And I've been fortunate enough to do it my entire adult life. So
that is very fortunate.
It certainly is. I mean, it was very fortunate of me when I started. I started my first recording gig in 1996 while I was still in school, working as a recording engineer at a small multi-track studio, and starting a career even in the 90s when the record industry was much healthier, at least financially healthier than it is today, by a lot, was a daunting enough task then. But to continue to do it, and gosh, I feel for folks starting out now, it's that much harder in the 2010s. But being that this is the Poptimist podcast, I am a very optimistic person myself. And as I'm sure you guys feel, music does so much for people, for the human race in general, that it's not going anywhere. We're just in this place of flux in terms of how people consume music and how they integrate with it commercially, I think.
Yeah, the business direction. I'm living down in Nashville now, so that's where I'm at. I've been there for a little over a year.
Okay.
I've been away from Maine for about 2 years now, and just dealing with the business and I've already seen, I don't even know how many people I've already seen come and go.
Sure.
Just come to town, and then they're there for 6 months and then gone.
Yeah.
Like an emergency comes back up at home, and then they just never come back.
Sure.
And it can be a very brutal business. I've experienced the lows, and I'm starting to experience the mids now.
Sure.
which is nice.
It's a step
maybe,
in the right direction.
Maybe one day the highs. But,
I hope so.
Maybe you can just give kind of a brief overview of what mastering is for the average listener who might not know.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I consider mastering the final step in the creative process of making a recording. It really is the final creative step, and it's the first step in distribution. We're not in the business of mastering CDs. We're not in the business of mastering LPs or mastering streaming audio. We're in the business of making recorded music sound great. That's the last step of the creative process of making a recording, and then presenting it into the marketplace in its best way possible, in the sense of preparing final masters for distribution and whatever that distribution might be. Here in 2017, that's a number of different things. For almost every project, we end up outputting a final master for CD, oftentimes for vinyl, for various means of digital distribution and streaming, mastered for iTunes, for the Apple Music Store and Apple Music Streaming, high resolution digital audio for various digital distributors. It's a very fractured distribution model now, but our job is to make recorded music sound its best and then get it into the pipeline in terms of distribution and create whatever master formats needed in that regard. On the final creative part of the process, that's what I do every day as a mastering engineer, and it's really again the last step of the entire recording process. And you'd start with pre-production, recording, where you're recording individual tracks or many tracks at once. Mixing, which is the act of balancing all those tracks and doing all the final sweetening to the individual tracks and outputting them, for 99% of commercially available recordings today in stereo. Then the stereo mix comes to me as a mastering engineer, and my job is to essentially make it sound as great as it can based on what I can do with a stereo mix. And the two main types of tools that I use in that domain are equalization and dynamics processing, which would be kind of an umbrella for compression, limiting, and like that. And I use those two tools and a number of iterations of them to take a stereo mix and just make it sound as great as it can. And often as part of that conversation, people will say, well, why can't that happen in mixing? And of course, really good mix engineers provide me really great sounding mixes. But mastering is still a part of the creative process. We offer a new perspective. We offer it in the highest quality listening environments like the room that we're in right now. I sit in this room every single day and I hear a cross-section of recordings from all over the world in all walks of the audio and recording life. And that essentially gives me a huge viewpoint, like a macro viewpoint of what really great recordings sound like. And I can take that experience and I can impart it on every recording that I work on. So finalizing a recording creatively and sonically, and then outputting final masters is really what we do here every day.
That kind of reminds me of something Jonathan Wyman once said to me. We were talking about at one point we're going to work together on something, and basically what he was saying is every step in the process is like more important than the last. He's like, if you don't have good writing, you can't have a good performance. If you don't have a good performance, you can't have good production. If you can't have good production, you can't have good mixing. If you can't have good mixing, you can't have good mastering.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
In today's day and age, you have to have something quality and something good because there's so much out there. It's hard not to entirely think of it in terms of competition, but it is a competition because someone's going to turn on your recording and they're going to decide within 3 seconds if they're going to keep listening or not. And I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I feel like we've been conditioned now with technology, although it is very healthy and very good, I think in a lot of ways, there are a lot of new challenges that have come along in this digital day and age that I think we're still trying to catch up with.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on a number of different levels. And first, I'd just like to say that Jonathan is a good friend and colleague of mine. Him and I have been working on records together for pretty much my entire career, 16 or 17 years now. As a mastering engineer, and he's an amazing record producer and mixing engineer and recording engineer, and he's right on the money with what you've just said, and that all the steps in the process have to be as best as they possibly can be. Arrangement itself leads to good mixing later down the line.
Yes.
If you haven't, you don't have a good arrangement or the right arrangement, your mix engineer is going to struggle with mixing your recording all day long. It's going to be really hard for them. If they don't output a good mix, that makes my job that much harder. The best sounding recordings I've ever mastered came to me already sounding really great, and then I could just take them a few steps further. So that is totally true, and I also agree with the idea or the notion that you've got to have kind of your best foot forward with your recording. I think even more so now than ever, because people are, I don't want to say sophisticated is not a good way to say it, because I don't mean that to be detrimental to the past and people's perception in the past, but our perception has changed a lot in the digital world. And as you said, if something doesn't sound good off the bat, you're not going to gain anybody's attention for more than a handful of seconds. Because I grew up watching MTV and listening to FM radio, and like we were spoon-fed stuff, and a lot of it happened to be really great, and some of it wasn't. But there were very few options. I couldn't just say, well, I don't really like what I'm seeing on MTV now. Let me pull up my iPhone and dial up Spotify and listen to one of millions of different recordings, whatever I want to listen to, right? So you do have to capture your audience's attention in the best way possible, and doing it with a great recording. Those things go hand in hand. You've got a great performance, a great song, and a great recording that elevates it sonically to the listener, then that's really important. And that's one of the things that I think has been a major misstep in our industry in the past 15 years or so, is as things shifted from, the heyday of selling CDs and the heyday of revenue in the recording industry to where we are now, which I would say we live in almost an entirely streaming world now. As things changed, the very natural notion was to do things quicker, less expensively, and the ability to really focus on details and spend. Let's just get to it. Like to budget, being able to budget things the way recordings used to be budgeted has changed so much, but it's taken away from the sound of most recordings. And I think that was a huge misstep, because what it's meant is that the consumer already started to place less and less value on recorded music. And if us as fans of recorded music start listening to new recordings and are like, they really don't sound good, then we're putting less value into them, and we're feeling less connected to them. And to make a recording sound really great, and the whole point in what all of us do in this industry is to take something that should connect with people to begin with, hopefully a great song and a great performance, and shine the best light on it so that it connects with the listener, right? And if we're not
the truest vision.
Yes, the truest vision. And if we're not doing that, then we lose the listener. And I think that, and I don't want to say it's certainly not across the board by any means, but we were making better sounding recordings 15 or 20 years ago on average than we are today, for a number of different reasons. And a lot of them come down to practical and financial reasons, or more so financial first that drives practical reasons.
I think personally that's really exciting to me, because it's created basically this giant black hole in the industry that there are no rules now. I mean, in some ways there have never been really any rules in the music business. But now more than ever, it is the Wild West. Like, once the whole Napster thing happened, the floodgates opened and there was no going back. And personally, I've dealt with a lot of musicians down in Nashville, how, they bemoan the digital age and how horrible it is. And I have the complete opposite thought process on it. I see guys like Dan Auerbach down there and Jack White doing their thing, and it's really inspiring to see. They figured out how to make it work, and they figured out how to make their record sound a certain way with like old sounds, but they work with guys like Chad Blake that make it sound kind of new. So that was one thing I also wanted to talk about, was you working on kind of like the Black Rock album, and what that process was like and what that experience was like from start to finish.
Sure. So that's one of my favorites. Gosh, how many years ago was that now? 4 or 5 years ago, maybe?
I think longer than that.
Maybe it was longer than that. Okay. That came to me through Chad, who I've done a number of records with, who's also one of my favorites, if not my favorite mix engineer and recording engineer for many, many years. I mean, I was hooked on everything he did in the 90s when I was a lot younger. In fact, a lot of my favorite reference recordings when I was in college for recording and music and was just starting as a professional, more than half of my favorite reference recordings were Chad Blake recordings. I love everything he does. I love his vibe. I love his sonics. He's just really great. So I've had the opportunity to work with him a bunch of times, and been fortunate enough to work with him a bunch of times, including the Black Rock album. He sent it my direction. He mixed half of it, and another great engineer, Joel Hamilton in New York City at Studio G in New York City, mixed the other half of it. And Joel and I do a lot of records together, and he is also a really amazing recording and mix engineer. So you have these two great engineers that have a really good sense of bringing an artist's vision home. They were both very different in terms of the way they present mixes to me as a mastering engineer. And I knew that going into it because I'd worked with them both a bunch. But and there was a third engineer who, I'm sorry, that person's name is going to escape me at the moment, but I think maybe had one track on that album. But it brings me to another part of the creative process of mastering is the fact that this is very commonplace to have an album come to me that's coming from 3 different engineers. It's the
very
same artist.
fractal.
Yeah, exactly. And then a big part of my job is not only to make everything sound great, but make, visualize the album as an album as opposed to just a collection of recordings. Exactly. Unified and have some kind of sonic bass line that works throughout the entire album. And all 3 engineers did a great job. They all did things differently and presented the recordings or the mixes to me a little bit differently in terms of the amount of compression they would use or the level they would present their mixes at and a number of different things. And my job was to take all those great mixes and make it work as one album, which is just a big part of what I do. And that happens on, I would say, more albums than less, or the majority of the albums that I get are a number of different engineers, oftentimes a number of different producers as well. And that was the case with BlackRock. And fortunately, in Joel and in Chad, I mean, their stuff just always sounds so great. And they're artists in their own right. And that's certainly...
For sure, yeah.
Yeah,
it's an art form, what Chad does. I mean, if you look at... I really learned more about him, I guess, after listening to I think he mastered Brothers, or not mastered, he mixed Brothers by Black Keys.
Yes.
And he started just doing a bunch of stuff, and he's all over the radio now. Like all this stuff he does, I don't know if it's always been that way or if he experienced something a little bit later, but sonically there's nothing else that really sounds like him on the radio. He sounds different. If you have something mixed by him, it sounds different. I remember when Do I Want to Know came out by Arctic Monkeys. Mm-hmm. I heard that and I was like, this reminds me of the Black Keys, and I looked up all the credits for it and I was like, oh, that's why. Yeah, he had his fingerprints all over it.
Yeah, no, he's amazing, and he has been doing it at that kind of level his entire career.
Yeah.
Really, I guess since probably... I would venture to guess sometime in the early to middle 80s. I came to know of him by the early 90s with Los Lobos records that he was working on at the time. He did Sheryl Crow's second record, which is a fantastic sounding and has so much vibe to it. All the Soul Coughing records were favorites of mine. He had done all of those. And the list goes on and on and on. But the thing that I love about him is a mix engineer and is a recording engineer as well, though I think he's primarily focused on mixing these days, is he's very adventurous, he's very artistic, and he's very creative. He was always the kind of guy that would do something completely different and create some different new sound that nobody had ever created before because he was willing to try it and to do it. And he's just a very creative and artistic guy. And the way I liken his mixes to others, and it's not a disrespect to others, but there are some mix engineers that are, in the top 1% of mix engineers, which is where I place Chad as well, that do a killer job, and it sounds great on radio, and it sounds great, when you listen in the car, and it sounds great everywhere, and everything sounds sort of perfect, which is awesome unto itself. But Chad's thing to me always feels like it's perfectly not perfect. For lack of a better way of saying it, it's like his mixes always have so much character to them.
Yes.
That, as opposed to being like, well, everything sounds really great. The balance is really awesome.
It's another layer to the song.
Sonically, it's great. Yeah, it's another layer to the song. It's another artistic layer to the song that I think very few do. I'd venture to guess that very few, if any, do it none of them do it like him, but very few do it in a similar way. And that's why he's my favorite mix engineer. I would take that extra sense of creativity and artistry in what he does.
He adds value to it. He brings something else to it that maybe wasn't originally there.
He does, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I've always loved everything that he does. And like I said, I've been fortunate to do a lot of records with him, including that BlackRock record, which is just one of my favorites. I go back to it often.
Yeah. I think Dan Auerbach, to me, he's very exciting as a producer. The one thing that I kind of noticed, I really started delving deeply into the Black Keys and everything that Dan Auerbach does, and that record was a huge turning point for him because that was pre-Brothers. So Brothers was the next album around. I think they worked with Danger Mouse right before they did BlackRock. They did Attack and Release.
Right.
So they already started heading into a little bit of a different direction. You could hear the change in them as artists, that they were going for something else than they had done before. And they did Black Rock, and then after that was Brothers, and the floodgates opened, and now they've been busy ever since, which is really cool. I think my favorite personal record that Chad has mixed was the Arcs record. Have you heard the Arcs?
I don't think I've heard it. No.
It's Yours. The album is called Yours Dreamily. It's Dan Auerbach's his other band that he put together.
Okay.
It's kind of crazy. They have 2 drummers in the band. All the musicians he's playing with are the guys from like Truth and Soul that played with Amy Winehouse on her record.
Okay.
So I saw them live at Ryman Auditorium down in Nashville, and they had the 2 drummers. They had one monitor on stage.
Okay.
So it was a Neil Young style. It was super loud in there, super bombastic. It was the heaviest gig I've ever heard in my life. And I don't know, just to go off on a Dan Auerbach tangent, but he's very, very exciting. And
yeah, he is.
Yeah, that record, the Black Rock record, I really love it a lot, and definitely had an impact on me.
Awesome. Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
And I'll check out that Arcs record. It sounds like right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's cool. It's kind of weird. Like, they're almost like these... They have like a mariachi band playing with them on the album. So it's really strange. It's like, it's totally experimental. And I think Dan was probably influenced by Chad with some of that stuff too, with the Los Lobos, right?
Los Lobos, and Chad was in a band with some of the guys from Los Lobos called the Latin Playboys. Yeah. Which I definitely recommend you checking out, because they're like, as interesting and cool as Los Lobos is, the Latin Playboys are even more experimental and just a little more wacky and fun to listen to. Yeah,
that's cool.
Really cool stuff.
So another question I had about some of your past work is With Teeth by 9 Inch Nails. You were kind of mentioning before we started today that you did the surround sound mix for that, which most people haven't heard. I didn't really realize that there was a difference at the time. Can you explain a little bit about how you got involved in that process? Sure.
So I did the surround sound mastering on that, and the person that mixed it was an engineer named James Brown, who's worked with 9 Inch Nails for many years, and the Foo Fighters and so on and so forth. He's really talented. Around the time that album came out, one thing that was changing, or had been changing for a few years in our industry that unfortunately never really took hold, was the concept of releasing studio albums in surround sound. And at the time it was pretty much strictly 5.1, so 5 full range channels, left, center, right, left surround, right surround, and the 0.1 channel would be a subwoofer that would go up to about 200 hertz or so. And there were a couple of formats that, and I could sort of see this coming, unfortunately, at the time, that didn't survive. One of them was called DVD audio, and the other was called Super Audio CD, that would deliver audio both in high resolution digital stereo and in surround sound to the consumer. You just had to have the proper hardware to play it back. And With Teeth came out on what at the time was called a DVD audio hybrid disc. On one side, and I have a copy of it somewhere around here, but on one side was the Redbook CD layer that you could play in any CD player. And if you flipped it around on the other side...
I vaguely remember this now. Yeah.
And if you had a DVD audio player, which, and here's where the confusion is, a DVD audio player, which is new hardware different from a DVD video player, you could play the 6-channel version of it.
Yeah, right.
What's that?
Don't put this on a DVD video.
Right. And so what ended up happening with both that format and the Super Audio CD format is, aside from some niche recordings that come out now, those formats basically succumbed to the iPod, and you could sort of see it coming. It was like right around the same time that the iTunes Music Store didn't exist or was just about to exist. The iPod was just starting to grab hold.
Right.
The rollout of those two formats was so confusing to the consumer, not to mention the initial expense of new hardware and things, that all the major record labels, in this country at least, discontinued making recordings on those formats, which also meant that a vast majority of surround sound albums stopped, or we were sort of coming on where a lot of surround sound albums were being made, and that really fell back quite a bit. Yeah. There are some that are being made, very few pop albums every year. Mostly it's in the classical domain. But at any rate, so that was what With Teeth was all about. And James Brown came out for the mastering of it. He did a great job on the mix. And what was cool is, if you've ever heard music in surround sound, it can be, if it's done properly and if it's done right, it can be really exciting and really interesting, and it's a whole new dimension of audio. It's not just sitting back and listening to left and right and discerning a soundstage based on left to right and front to back. It's all around you, and of course Nine Inch Nails and Trent's music lends itself so well
Yeah.
to that. You know, all the layers, all the depth
Right.
of the arrangement. Yeah.
Sounds like an amazing experience to hear that in surround sound.
It was really, really cool. It was a really fun
Yeah.
experience, and it was really, really well done.
Yeah.
He seems very like he has a very particular set of ears with what he's going for. I think Alan Moulder was the one who produced that album,
I believe so, yeah.
and we were kind
Or
of talking.
co-produced it maybe with Trent or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, exactly. Because he's definitely he has an idea of what he wants to do, and the way I always compare his production style, he always really reminds me of Prince. The way that he drops things out and then brings them back, or he'll add something
great.
weird.
I never thought of it that way, because
But
Prince
that's-
is one of my favorite artists.
That's exactly
It's
who he
true.
reminds me of. He's like the dark. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but he's like the
Dark
brooding,
Prince.
the
brooding version of
prince.
Prince.
Yeah, the angry prince.
That's really great. I've never heard anybody say that before, and I completely agree. Now.
Yeah.
Letting
Yeah,
that settle in my mind a little bit. That's really true.
that With Teeth is the album that I'm most familiar with Nine Inch Nails. And it was, I think I started listening to it, like growing up here in Maine, like having the winter, it just mashed. It was so dark and like overcast all the time. But the album itself, it reminds me of like an operating room. That's how I would describe it. It's so sterile. Everything has its appropriate place, and it all has to be clean, and it all has to be in the right spot until you turn the drill on.
Right.
And the blood gets everywhere. That's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of an operation. Like there is a method for every thing that he does, every single sound.
Yeah.
It
Which
has its part.
That's such a great point to make, because that's really, I think that should be part and parcel to every recording that's made.
I agree.
You know, getting back to what you said about your conversation with Jonathan Wyman, the notion is that, or the whole thing should start with arrangement. You know, and the notion in terms of
Yes.
recording anything, mixing anything, and mastering anything always goes back to arrangement. And as you're saying, when Trent makes a record, he very purposely, he knows, it's almost like hearing a rock symphony in some ways, like for lack of a better, like it seems like it's very well thought out and planned out, but it's very musical and emotional and great. And that's so important, because I feel like, especially given today's technology, and I'm not a today technology basher, and I'm not, I think we should probably go down this road at some point, but you had mentioned, you know, some people maybe, I might be taking your words or paraphrasing incorrectly, tell me if I am, but sort of this feeling of like the record business isn't what it used to be, and people sort of complaining about that, or not embracing new technology, not
kind of folding their arms.
And that's
stiff
so,
upper lip.
That's so wrong, in my opinion. I live in the same world that you do, or have the same mindset as you do, in the sense that this is a brave, new, and optimistic world that we live in. In a lot of ways, I think so much good is coming of it, and is going to continue to come of it, whether it's recording technology itself, or I'm really excited about, you know, the new means of distribution and streaming in so many ways.
In what way? Yeah.
So many different ways. I think that, one, there's so much growth there. If you look at, so I've always lived in this world where I love music, of course, for music's sake and for art's sake. But I've been a professional in the recording business my entire life, and that's how I, you know, feed my family, keep a roof above us, which is
what a concept.
What a concept, right? And that's so important. And I may have said this in class before, Ned, at USM, but I feel like the 90s was this perfect culmination of artistry and commercial viability. It was like you could make really great music, and a lot of really great artistic music was getting to the masses and was commercially viable at that time. And I feel very fortunate to have lived through that time. I feel like it's sort of like what the 60s and 70s must have felt like in some ways.
Sure.
So I pine for a recording industry that is thriving again, and I think that streaming presents such a huge opportunity for that to happen. But I think the people that are folding their arms over and saying they want to go back to the good old days are just digging their, you know, putting their heads in the sand, and they need to get their heads out of the sand and move forward.
Some of those people are really talented and really good too.
Of course they are, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a tough thing, and I understand it, because all of a sudden what may have been viable for a lot of people in this industry 10 or 15 years ago is not anymore. And that's a bitter pill to swallow. I get that. I totally get that. But I feel as though there are too many folks feeling that way, and they're, instead of fixing anything because they're looking at the past for a fix, they're holding back the future.
Yes.
That's, I think, the best way to put it.
That seems to be the modern American mindset right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like we can't look to the past to try to fix our problems in the present. We need to look to the future and where we live now.
Reverse engineer.
Yeah.
Where do you want to be, and then go back 10 steps.
Yeah.
Which makes me kind of think about, like, as far as one thing that we've been talking about, Ned and I, we were talking about music and pursuing a career and all of that, and we were, what do we call it? We said it was basically like productivity, experiments in productivity.
Yeah. Sure.
That's really all it is. Like, how efficient can you be in your day-to-day? So what are some things that you do, like when you first wake up? Do you go and work out? Do you eat a big breakfast? Is there anything that you avoid doing? Do you not answer emails right away? So what does your average day look like? How do you how do you get and stay productive every single day?
That's a really great question. I do work out every day. I'm a runner, a distance runner, so I try to get that in every day. This time of year, it's a little tough, especially the past couple of days with the weather we've had. But I do other things like spin bike or ride my bike in better weather and like that. But I do find that exercise is hugely important to me. It helps me reduce stress. It helps me focus. It's like, for people that meditate, it's as close to meditating as I get. Like I get out and run and everything just kind of peels away and it starts my day off really well. I also have a young family, so I have kids, that I take care of and get them to school along with my wife. But I usually, when I get up in the morning, I almost immediately start reading. I usually need a little time before I can exercise. I usually try to, read a little bit, get myself, and reading for me is usually like news and that kind of stuff, which helps me kind of wake up and focus myself a little bit, go out and run, walk my dog, get my kids to school, all that kind of stuff. I usually have like a whole, what feels like at least a third of a day or half a day that I do before I even step into the studio. And that sets up the rest of my day because I don't have to worry about those things.
Morning routine is important.
Yeah, it's really important. And then I come in here. I'm here at 10. I usually work until sometime in the 6 o'clock, occasionally into the 7 or 8 o'clock hour if it's really busy. I try not to work crazy hours because I think it's counterproductive. Given the way that we communicate now, I'm communicating with clients throughout the day over email, sometimes over Facebook, over text, over phone. My front office is communicating with clients as well and setting sessions up for me in that regard. And I'm just getting through all my sessions in a day. And most days it's certainly more than one, if not several. I'll juggle other things. There are things that I honestly don't love doing, but I think are so important today. Like social media. I've really, in the past year or so, I've tried to step up my social media game because, obviously this is an audio medium we're on now, but we're sitting in front of a stack of CDs and DVDs and box sets and things like that. And, credits, liner notes were always the bread and butter of this business, and word of mouth and what records you've worked on. And these days, most people don't see liner notes.
No.
And social media is one of the best places between that and maintaining
Interesting.
websites.
I've never really thought of it that way.
Yeah, and 5 years ago, I was really reluctant to do that. My sister, who's a really brilliant person, works in PR, and she's like, you should be on Twitter every day and Facebook. And I was like, you know what? And this is true, and I stand by this. But 5 years ago, most of the people in this business that were busy, especially those that never lived with social media and didn't live with lived a good part of their adult life even without the internet, would think, oh, that person's on social media, so they must not be busy enough. Like, that it would be like it would actually be seen as a negative as opposed to a positive.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's finally shifted because virtually everybody's on social media now. And I've really tried my hardest to tap into it as just a means of, and I hate self-promotion. It doesn't feel good to me, but it's like, if I don't do it, nobody's doing it.
Mark of a true artist, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. I absolutely really dislike doing it. All I want to do is master records, but if I'm not active on the internet, then I feel like that's part of.
That's a way to pull it in to keep give you more work, to keep you busy and keep you doing what you love.
And I try to do it in a way that feels really good to me in terms
genuine,
which is that's obviously super important.
Yeah.
Being genuine, trying not to seem like you're a braggart, and trying to and this is how I live my life anyways, but shine a light on other people. It's a good opportunity if one of my clients, one of their recordings is doing really well, that's what I'm going to talk about is, congratulations to that artist for how well that record's doing. And I was really privileged to get to work on that and those kinds of things. So I pepper that stuff in throughout the day as well, because I feel like that's become so important in our industry because there are so few ways. We don't advertise. And I think advertising would have a huge negative effect on what we do. Plus, I don't even know where we would advertise. I get written up in various publications that are nationwide publications.
Sure.
And these days, I don't know if anybody's seeing them. And
they're very specific in what they are.
Yeah.
It's niche. Whoever is seeking them out probably already knows who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so even like, having a write-up, and no disrespect to Mix Magazine, it's the leader in terms of recording industry publications, but having a write-up in Mix Magazine, that happens like almost once a year or once every other year for me, being involved in something in their magazine. And I'm not sure how much that moves the needle in terms of people knowing more about me.
Yeah.
What actually helps even more is when that happens, that I post it on social media and I blast it out.
Yeah, you can send a link to the article that's online.
Exactly. That I think gets, for me, again, because the niche part of it is like, I have a niche too, so that gets that to my niche of people, So those things I try to pepper in on most days when I can. Even if it's just, I'm taking a 2-minute break, shoot something off on Facebook that's interesting, or on Twitter, or both, or and Instagram, and those kinds of things. Things that 5 or 6 years ago I never would have done, and I didn't really truthfully want to do.
Right.
I've become much more comfortable with it now, but, my passion is just being in the chair mastering. But I think that those things are so important in the 21st century in so many different businesses. My PR sister is very right about it, but even has become really important in our business, which has mostly been word of mouth all these years.
Yeah, so that's kind of another thing I want to talk about is Gateway in general. It has like this amazing reputation within the business and is kind of held as the standard. Mm-hmm. What do you think it is about the way that you guys work, both with clients and maybe other business partners, or what you bring to the table that might be a little bit different than how other people are approaching it?
That's a really great point. And I don't want to sound disrespectful. This isn't a knock to, if I can take the way other people approach it part aside, because there are a lot of good people out there doing a lot of good things. But
absolutely.
There's one word that always comes to my mind that I think defines Gateway really well, and it comes from Bob, it comes from me, and it comes from everybody here. And it's one of the things that Bob has said to me over the years, especially earlier on in my career when I was assisting him, and then when I started taking on my own projects, is integrity. And one of the things that is I think been a bond between him and I, and that he has said to me before, is that he can always trust me. I have a level of integrity that he feels is on par with his level of integrity.
Because you're representing him by working here.
Yeah, and representing Gateway. And I think that we both have a very similar mindset in whatever that, however you can frame what that word means. And I think that in itself speaks for itself. We have a lot of passion for what we do, and we put a lot of energy into what we do, and we always only want to do the right thing. Like it's very easy in anything to let other things cloud what you're doing, and we don't. It's just integrity. It's just doing the best job possible, treating our clients most respectfully as possible, and whether you're Joe from down the street or you're I don't know, some superstar artist like Carrie Underwood, you get treated the same way when you work with me or Bob, no matter who you are.
Yes.
If you're our client and we decide to work with you, we treat you the same way, which means we give you 110% no matter who you are. And we've had a number of, that's always been one of, I think, our biggest compliments. We've had a number of clients say that kind of thing before. Yeah. A couple of years ago, Bob and I did an AES panel together that he was moderating. I was on the panel with a few other mastering engineers. And when it got to the Q&A, a client of mine who I didn't realize was in the audience stood up and just said, something to the effect that he wanted to say hello to us and he wanted to thank me for working on his record with him, and he wanted to thank Bob and I for treating him like he was Bruce Springsteen, and he's an independent client making great music, but he was like, you guys treated me so well, and we were like, well, that's the way we should treat you. Our clients are gold to us, and we don't care who you are. And I think that that's really important.
The relationship is very important.
Yeah, relationships, and I try to maintain and cultivate relationships with my clients as best as possible, because that's everything that our business is about, and that's what I want it to be too. I want to work with people I like to work with, that I have a good rapport with, and I'm always going to treat them with not only the utmost respect, but we treat our clients in a very high way. We treat them like gold and kill them with kindness, and that's the way it should be, in my opinion. And having started in this industry in the mid-'90s, and then seeing sort of the tail end of the best times in this industry into some of the hardest times in this industry, I've always always felt like, I mean, number one, I think that that's part of my personality, but I've always felt that way about my clients. It's always been like, you know, customer first, and my clients are like gold to me because that's how we exist, is by having clients.
Yeah, exactly.
And not to mention the fact that, you know, my teenage self is in my body all day long, trying not to jump out of my own skin when I get to work on some great music, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is, if I could go back and ask my 16-year-old self if this is what I'd be doing, I'd be like, yeah, right. I wish it's what I'd be doing. So I keep that in mind every day, that it's a privilege to work in the music business. It's a privilege to work on great music and to do it in a place that, as you said, and I agree with that. And I agree that Gateway was that before I was here. And I hold that as sort of, you know, my mantle in terms of what I do here as well, is trying to be the best of our industry. And, you know, it's still sort of like pinching yourself every day that you get to do this stuff. So, you know, of course I treat my clients really, really well and work as hard as I can to make their music sound as good as it can. And I don't want to say that nobody else, that other, our colleagues out there in the world aren't doing that, but I can just speak from my experience, a couple of things that I think maybe are why people look at us the way that they do in this industry.
Yeah.
So you have basically this massive discography of a ton of different people from all different styles of music that you've worked with. Mm-hmm. I'm sure at some point you must have worked with someone that you really look up to, or a project like you did with the Lights Out for Nirvana. Were you a big fan of them growing up?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So this is coming into you and you have it, and then you're like, oh shit, what do I do now? Like these are sacred to me.
Right.
So how do you approach a situation like that with something that you feel like you have your own personal, I guess, past experiences with, and maybe memories related to, and now you're almost, in a way, rewriting that?
Yeah, there have been a number of instances, fortunately for me, like that, and I think that you've got to try to turn off, you sort of have to turn off the, for lack of a better way of saying it, fanboy part of it. Like, you know, when I got to work on some of that Nirvana stuff, it was like, whoa, I grew up listening to these records, and I'm getting to hear what Smells Like Teen Spirit, that Butch Vig mix. That was one of the things I got. Bob and I did that one together, that with the Lights Out, and I got to do the Butch Vig mix of Smells Like Teen Spirit, which was sort of that mythical, you know, Butch had mixed the album and the band loved it, and then somebody else mixed the album and the band always said they liked, you know, Butch's mix was more like what they wanted, and the other mix was more like what the record label wanted. Like, everybody can read that story in so many different places, and to hear that kind of stuff, I was like, oh wow, yeah. My 2 or 3 of the bands that I played in when I was in high school, we played that song, you know.
Yeah.
But I think you have to, and I've had a lot of experiences like that, and some of them with people in the room too. And I think you just have to be calm, cool, and collected, and just focus on
getting the task done.
Getting the task done and doing it as best as you can.
You have a discipline. You need to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And then I can go home and like talk to my wife about it and be the fan.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really important. Because I think that it, I don't know, it focuses you in a lot of ways. And it keeps you from letting those emotions cloud your inability to think
your
straight
judgment,
or do
your ears.
Yeah, exactly. Or do your work well.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've figured out early on how to turn some of those things off so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't affect you having good command in the studio and doing a good job.
Yeah.
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 I could see that when you were teaching too. Like when I first came into your class, one of the first things that I noticed about you was just like, for a guy who's like got all these Grammys and like platinum records, like you really didn't seem to have any sort of chip on your shoulder, and I was really amazed at like how down to earth it felt, like the setting of our class. Like, of course, we were just like looking at you like, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And,
that's really kind
take
of
notes. But I thought it was really cool that, you know, you were at the end of the day a very down to earth guy, and you talked about in class about how, you know, one of your strong like suits in what you do is the fact that you're very good at being tactful with other people, and you're like what you were talking about. You're able to kind of like put your ego aside and just kind of work with what is actually the most effective way of communicating with people, not letting, you know, egos clash, because, you know, musicians and their egos, you know, can get a little volatile.
It can get fuzzy. Yeah. We've all been in a band before.
Yeah. I think, do you feel like it was naturally your personality to have that type of like dynamic with other people that you work with? Is that something you know, worked on, or was that just kind of a trait you had going into the business?
I mean, probably a little bit of both. Probably mostly something that was just my personality. That's just
Yeah.
who I am.
Right.
And I don't want to be anybody but myself. And I don't want. I see people, whether it's in this business or just in life in general, that walk around either with an attitude or a chip
Right.
on their shoulder,
Yep.
or any number of things you could think of. That you might expect from somebody like that. And negativity is just, I can't imagine how exhausting it is.
Right.
I don't want to exhaust my energy being negative,
definitely.
and being angry,
Yeah, yeah.
or having a chip on my shoulder, or thinking more highly of myself than I
Right.
should, or any of those things. I think just are a waste of time and energy, number one.
Yep.
And I think that is my personality. It's my upbringing. That's my personality. That's just who I am. And I really feel fortunate, like I can just be myself
Yeah.
and be successful without having to put on some other hat
Yeah.
or some other.
In a professional
Yeah.
world, that's a
Especially in the
That's a
music
huge thing.
business, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people, from what I've just encountered in my journeys and my experience, they try and put on a lot of mask, and I think it's important sometimes to be a chameleon, but you can't hide your true nature.
Yeah.
I think that really has to shine through, and I can definitely tell from you that the positive energy comes across, and you kind of pull it in. People want to talk to you because of it.
right.
Yeah, well, I just think it's, again, all I can say for myself is that the positive energy is just, that actually is uplifting as opposed to being negative or
Right.
having an attitude or
Right.
any of those things. And again, that's just kind of how I've always been. I mean, I've never felt, not only I've never felt the need to, but I've also quite the opposite. Even growing up as a kid, when I would see somebody being treated disrespectfully or unkind by somebody else or bullied or anything, I'd be the first one to try to help stick up for that person that was in that position, because I'd be like, well, why are you acting like that? Don't be a
Right.
jerk, you know,
Right,
to
yeah.
the person that was treating them that way, because that's just not how I am. And I don't think there's any,
Right.
I don't think there's any need for it. As long as people are respectful and treat me respectfully, they're going to get the same from me, and they're going to get positivity from
Yeah.
me. And I just can't imagine how exhausting it is to live that other way.
Right.
And then back to the practical side of it, like I think that when you're working with anybody for that matter, but certainly in this business, when you're working with artists and working with other people, you've got to be able to read the room. You've got to know how to get the best out of everybody. You're dealing with people's art. It's very near and dear and very personal. Even here, where we're not recording tracks, this is where artists have to let go after this process is done. And fortunately, they're always really happy to be here, and they're mostly very happy with everything up to this point. And I get to kind of like see them over the finish line, and that's a really good feeling.
Right.
But still, some people might be nervous, some people might be trepidatious. They're finishing up something they've been working on for a long time.
Something very personal,
Something very
a
personal.
snapshot of their life, like.
Yep.
With something like that, this is with it being the last, thinking of it as like a factory, this is the last part of the line. They're coming to you right before they let it go. So there might be
Right.
baggage prior to you coming into the picture. Like
Yep.
maybe they did a song that they didn't really like, or the producer felt a certain way about it, and the artist ended up going with their way, then they regret it and they bring it to you. So
Yeah.
what's it like managing expectations of an artist when they first walk in?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think that every situation is definitely different, and every artist is different.
Sure.
I'll also say that really these days, 95% of the time, I'm working on my own. I'm doing my thing and sending it back to them, and we talk and like that. But every artist is a little bit different. We're all people. We can read each other pretty well. When somebody comes in, I can tell whether they're nervous or they're anxious or they're really confident in what they already have and like that. So every situation is a little bit different. In terms of managing expectations, I think fortunately, if they've gotten here, then they already know they want to be here. They already
Yes.
so they've already sought out me to work with them, or Bob downstairs, and they already want to be here, and they know what they're going to get, and they know what we do. Certainly earlier on in my career, especially because I was really young when I first started. I started here when I was 22, and then I started mastering records when I was about 25. And I certainly remember for a number of years, clients would come if they would attend, and we haven't met before. I could certainly get the sense not with all of them certainly, but with some of them, they were like, who is this guy? Like, how old is he? And being a little nervous, especially since most of my colleagues, most other mastering engineers are a lot older than me. There are very few, there are a handful I can think of that are about my age. I don't think very many that are younger, maybe some that are within 10 years of me, but most of them doing it at the level that I am are quite a bit older than I am. So when I was especially when I was in my 20s, they, occasionally you'd have somebody come in the door and I could tell right away they were a little trepidatious. Like they knew of my reputation, they knew of Gateway's reputation, and the whole thing, but they were like, they'd walk in and be like, when did this guy start? When he was like 15 or something. But I would always just try my hardest to win them over, and it would always happen. And I think that it's that demeanor, that positive personality, and a command of what you're doing too, as you said, sometimes you can be working with somebody who you really respect and who you really love, and you grew up listening to their music, and you've got to kind of turn that off. And that's not, I don't mean that by any means in a disrespectful way, but you've got to be confident in yourself.
Yeah.
And
you're here for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can be hard sometimes to do.
Yeah. And be confident in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And, certainly this is a subjective, it's just kind of an art in itself. And sometimes you'll have a client say, well, I think maybe this or that. And I'm always open to that. It's something I learned really early on from Bob, like, well, let's try it, let's see, and then give my opinion and the whole thing. But being confident about all of those things and not letting anybody rattle you is really important, because I think things have changed so much in the industry since I started out. But when I started out, an engineer's competence and confidence were like his two best traits, or her best traits.
Yeah.
If you can show that you're competent, that you're confident, you're in command of your tools and in command of what's going on. And that doesn't mean you're barking at people or you're like, bossing people around. Quite the opposite of that. It's just more like you're confident and competent in what you're doing and achieving the goals of the people you're working with. Then you gain their confidence, and that's hugely important. The very first time I ever and it wasn't a mastering session, it was before I was a mastering engineer, but the very first time I ever sat in a session with a client who was a well-known artist, it was an editing session, and I kind of got through in at the end of the day into this editing session with the artist, her producer, and her engineer, all lovely people, all really well respected in our industry, making a great record. I had never sat in at that level with an artist editing, and I was just learning the workstation here.
Yeah.
I had learned it a little bit before I came here, but I didn't know it super well, so I always got a little nervous and I felt a little thrown to the wolves. But I came in and I conducted myself, I think, in a really positive, good way. It was also, I think, somewhat a nervous or anxious session for the artist. Got through it, everything went exceptionally well, showed that competence and confidence, and the artist was back the next day because they were mastering with Bob. They were back for another day of mastering, and at the end of that day, Bob made it a point. I had only been here for a couple of months to tell me that artist had made it a point to tell him how impressed she was with me and with just my sort of, lack of a better phrase, bedside manner in the studio and
ability.
That's
a great way to put it.
It's like being sort of like being a doctor in some ways, or hopefully a good doctor. Like you can, you can do your best for your patient. In this case, do your best for your
health.
Yep.
Right.
And that really was meaningful to me, and that gave me even more confidence, I think, moving forward. But I think you have to go into it, and of course, the confidence comes from knowing your stuff too.
Yeah.
But even in that situation, just do it. Right. Even in that situation, it was like I knew the workstation pretty well, but not well enough where I felt like, I did feel a little bit nervous, but I didn't show that nervousness off, and I
that's
handled
when
the
you
situation
grow.
well. Yeah, exactly.
That's when you get thrown to the wolves. It's like the most valuable times I've had is when maybe I've gone on stage or I've gotten into a situation where I wasn't entirely sure about how I do.
Yeah.
And you either eat complete shit and you learn a gigantic lesson.
Yeah.
Or your abilities, they get a little bit beyond what you thought they were just in that very moment. It makes you grow, and it gives you this whole new level of confidence. And it's like this endorphin boost that happens. It's just like, I gotta keep going, gotta keep going, gotta keep going.
Yeah, and good for you for knowing that, because I think that's really important, because some people don't take those chances because they're too afraid of eating that big pile of shit. But you're going to learn something
I hope to eat
from
many big piles of shit.
Yeah, because you're going to, as you said, you learn from that, and that's so important.
Yeah.
Like I've always felt that way as well. Just dive in and do it. Like the worst thing you can do is do nothing, because you're going to learn nothing and
You're
gain
going to
nothing.
stay right where you are.
Exactly.
So it seems that you have a really great work ethic. Where do you think was that instilled in you from your parents, or was it from music teachers, or?
It was really instilled in me from my parents, for sure. They both have amazing work ethics. They're both really hard workers. One thing my dad always said, and I'll sort of paraphrase it, but I remember this from forever ago is my dad always saying any job that you do is worth doing well, or anything that you do is worth doing well.
Absolutely.
And
Don't
that's a huge,
half-ass.
don't half-ass. Any job you do is worth doing well. That's my dad's side of it, and my mom's side of it is just this amazing work ethic, and I think confidence too in her work ethic and the way that she does things, and sometimes even obsessiveness. My sister and I joke where we can be our only siblings. We both have a strong work ethic that comes from our parents, and we get obsessive about certain things too. Like you hunt things down, which I think is really important. And that I think comes from my mom. Yeah. But I think that's where it all comes from. And then I'd also say that going to the University of Massachusetts at Lowell and their sound recording program instilled like another layer of that, or helped that go even further and shine even more, because that's one of those intangible things that program has, I think, heads above anywhere else, is a work ethic, a vibe about work ethic around.
It's very New England.
It's very New England.
Yeah,
it is,
yeah.
and I think it speaks well to the student body there too.
Yeah.
Like most of the people that go there come from families with very strong work ethics.
Yep.
And the program is designed. I mean, you can't get through that program without having a good work ethic, because they kind of make you work really, really hard for it. And that, I think, is an intangible that's meant to be there in that program, because you know what, if you can't deal with working on calculus to 3 a.m. or doing overnight recording sessions for your recording classes and doing all the other things you have to do to get through that program, you're not going to survive in this business. You don't want it enough.
Yeah. One thing that I've started to notice just with people that I've encountered in this is that you either want to do it or you don't.
Yeah.
And you can say that you want to do it all day long, but your actions really show through as far as you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. Like one movie that we've talked about that's had a great impact on me is Whiplash. Have you seen that movie?
I don't think I have. No.
Okay, this is amazing.
Okay.
So I don't want to give away too much about it, but it's about this drum student. I think he's like 18 or 19. He's in college. It's his first year, and he has this crazy teacher who plays all of these psychological games with him. And there's this one scene where he's sitting down, where he's telling a story, I think it's about Charlie Parker, and how he ends up eating shit one night on stage, and he was a laughingstock or whatever, and then he came back the next year, and he was playing at Carnegie Hall or something like that, and he blew everybody away with the most amazing solo, because he practiced for like 9 hours a day, and he wouldn't stop. And I think what he said was the next Charlie Parker wouldn't be discouraged. And I think that's true. It's like you can have so much thrown at you, and I know I've had a bunch of challenges, Ned's had a bunch of challenges that we've had to face along this journey, but it's like you're dragging all this weight behind you, and it's only making you stronger.
Yeah.
And it's scary sometimes.
Yeah.
It is. It's scary, but you've got to keep pulling it. And the other part of that too is you never know like what's going to happen tomorrow either. You could be pulling that weight the whole time, and then just decide, you know what, I'm just going to drop this now and go do something else. But you don't know like what the opportunity is waiting for you the next day.
Right. Yeah.
And I think for all of us that just keep slogging it out, those opportunities show up. And they're not just luck, and some of them are luck, but it's all hard work.
Yeah.
And it's also, opportunity meeting preparedness is really important.
Yes.
But if you don't keep pulling that weight, you're not going to get those opportunities.
I got that in a fortune cookie once.
Oh, did you?
Luck is opportunity meeting or preparation.
Yes.
Yeah,
No,
it's true.
and that's how I look at my own career, was opportunity meeting preparedness, because I got the opportunity to be here. But believe me, I'm not the only engineer that's been here over the past 18 years, but I'm one of the only ones I'm certainly the only one that has their own room here, and every time an opportunity even came up with the macro opportunity being here in the first place, the little micro opportunities over the years, I just jump into.
Yeah.
And you be prepared for them, and if you're not prepared for them, you try them anyways.
Yeah.
And just, and make something of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So thinking of it in terms of the productivity study that we were discussing earlier,
Okay.
what are some ways that you try and work smarter, not harder? Not necessarily cut corners, but things where you're like, this has to be done. Do you have a exact boilerplate for every project that you do? Or is it different every time? Or what do? Do you write everything down? Like, how do you do it?
I do. I keep notes on everything so I can recall it. I do have templates. I use Pro Tools for playing back mixes and for plugs. I have a ton of hardware, most of which doesn't get used very much anymore. And Pyramix is the place where all the mastered audio ends up for final editing and final output. And so I do have templates both in the Pyramix and the Pro Tools that I go to every day as a starting point. And then, that's just a starting point, and I change things from there. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. But I start with those, and then for me, and I think every engineer is a little bit different, I just dig in and start doing things. Not willy-nilly, but I start out with the control being the templates and my signal path staying relatively the same. Also knowing so much about so many pieces of gear I've used over the years if I want to inject something new into the signal path or something I've used in the past for a specific reason, having that as part of my tool set. But I have my signal path usually set up in a certain way, my templates set up in a certain way, and those are my jumping off points. Then I hit play and I just start doing it. I don't, some people will say they like to listen through, if it's a full album, maybe listen through the full album in terms of the mixes, and I wouldn't discourage anybody from doing what feels best for them, but for me, I just dive in and start. Everybody. Yeah, there's a method for everybody, exactly. I just start doing things. I start turning knobs and things, and if I need a reality check as to where the mix started, I'll go back and listen to the mix, but I sort of dive right in. I take notes so I can recall everything, but what I've been doing for several years now, and forgive me, Ned, I know you've heard this a few times, but I've been working so much in the box now, which has afforded me a number of different things, and it's started for me in terms of working almost exclusively in the box. It started for me as a challenge to see how productive or how efficient I could be on a certain project. And then I realized, like, whoa, this keeps getting so much better every year. This being the in the box plug-in processing keeps getting so much better. Where I went, not quite overnight, but over the course of several months, went from many, many years of using a hybrid signal path where I used a lot of analog outboard gear, some digital outboard gear in conjunction with plugs in the box, and that was my signal path, and occasionally all digital for something that sounded really great and didn't need a lot of work, to the complete opposite, like pretty much everything all digital and pretty much everything all in the box now.
Right.
And very rarely am I firing up the analog stuff anymore. And that was first born out of trying to be as efficient as I could be on a particular project. And of course, I wouldn't, to get back to integrity, if that wasn't doing it, I would have had to be less efficient and get the best sonic results, and I would have backed off of it. But I was pleasantly surprised at efficiency and quality meeting each other perfectly, and then kept challenging myself to do that more and more, to the point where for several years now I do everything in the box, or virtually everything in the box. And that helps productivity a lot because I can do more automation, I can recall things in a different way. And it also helped things creatively as well, where I could do things that otherwise...
New colors.
Yeah, new colors, and sometimes new colors in itself yield new creativity. New colors in more control, because now I can automate things that I might have done by hand on an analog equalizer. Right. I can just automate them and do more of that. And that's but opened up the doors for me to do even more of that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the intangibles in terms of what I do as well, and Bob as well, is like, we really dig in. We're not afraid to try anything as long as we think it's going to make things sound better. And staying in the box helps us do more of that in a more practical manner.
So on a closing note, what is some advice that you would give to anyone listening to this who's really trying to figure out, not even necessarily with music, but as far as career path and having discipline, work ethic, all those things? If you could go back, I guess, and talk to the 20-year-old version of you when you're still in college and you didn't know what your path was going to be yet, what would you say?
I would say a couple of things. Number one, I would say get comfortable with networking and knowing people, because that's how things work. And it's not who you know, not what you know. I don't believe in that at all. It's who you know and what you know. But when I was young, in my early 20s, I wasn't as outgoing as I am now, and I found, because I would want to network in a very organic way too, like I just never felt comfortable with it, or I didn't feel comfortable with it for a while. And that really is a big part of our business, so that's an important skill to work on. I venture, I'm just going to guess, but for a lot of people growing up with screens and constant internet interaction, I'm sure for some people that's even more difficult than ever. So that's really important. In terms of 21st century, starting out in the music business now, I think that you have to be willing to do a number of different things. And by that I mean be willing to chase down a number of different paths, which I did early on. I did everything from multi-track recording and mixing to mastering. Anytime, any opportunity, do a live-to-track recording of a classical ensemble at Harvard. I did that. Record lawyer conferences at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Boston. I did that. Like, I would try anything to see what was a good
What
path.
sticks.
So yeah, don't be afraid to have a wide net, especially now. Have a wide net and see what sticks, and see what not only sticks in terms of making a living, but sticks in terms of what you enjoy doing, because it might not be what you think it is, and vice versa. On a practical note, one thing a lot of people have been asking me for several years, and you're experiencing it yourself, Taylor, is where do you go now? And Nashville seems to be the place. A vast majority of my clients are in Nashville.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot going on there. I've known so many clients over the years, record producers, recording engineers, mixing engineers, artists, songwriters, all moving from other major cities to Nashville. New York City seems to me like it's just dying in terms of it being a center for music in the recording industry. It's
Which is
way too
sad.
expensive there. It is very sad because a lot of cool music has come from New York for a lot of years. I would never send anybody to New York today.
Really?
I wouldn't. I mean, there are some opportunities there, but how do you live there? It's like impossible to live there.
Especially if you're a young, starving artist.
Exactly. It's really tough. LA, maybe so, and I think as a recording engineer, Los Angeles has a lot going for it, not only in the music world, but you have the whole film and video industry there, which is I think a big path folks that love audio could go down. I considered it myself before I decided to stay in music. But Nashville seems to be the place everybody's going. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but if you want to be in a music center right now, that seems to be the place to be, especially if you want to be in the recording world. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I did
No,
something
I was
right.
just gonna say,
I did
Yeah,
something
I
right.
think you absolutely did.
Yeah,
I think you absolutely
One
did.
step ahead.
And I think you have to be willing to do that. Like I've had this conversation with people living in New England, and I hope for people that want to stay in New England and want to do what we do in New England, they can make an effort of it. But in your younger years, I feel like you've got to get up and if you have the opportunity to get up and move, you got to get up and do it then.
Yes.
And maybe you establish yourself and you can come back here or something. And also to that point, I'm also really reluctant to ever point a young person in the direction of massive student loan debt. I'm a firm believer in higher education, and I think that is really important in terms of music and the recording industry. But I'd be selective about where you do it and how you do it, because I can't imagine, being a young student coming out of a higher educational institution with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. You're not going to be able to.
It's not feasible.
It's not. Totally is not.
That's
Make me
the one
want to stick my
thing.
head in the sand.
that me and Ned always talked about, because me and Ned we've gone down a similar path, but two different paths. Because Ned has chosen to go to school, and I've gotten almost like 3 or 4 times I've thought about going, and I've started applying and I've started doing it, and I'm like, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
Something feels wrong about this. I'm going to be in all of this debt.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to be able to do music. I'm going to have to get a job, or I'm going to have to get a job that I don't like just to pay this back, so my life is on track.
Yeah.
Right.
Air quotes.
Exactly, and I think that again, I'm like I really firmly believe in the opportunities that could be afforded to you with a bachelor's degree. But if you do that, I think that and that's not necessarily right for everybody.
Yeah.
But if you do that, I think you've got to pick your points too. You've got to do it in a way that's cost effective.
It's definitely been a struggle sometime, as far as even just with normal jobs out in Nashville. There's so many young people moving there who all have degrees. So if I'm going up for a job, there have been jobs even though I might have 5+ more years experience in the workforce than them and life experience, I'm automatically disqualified because they don't see that degree when I put in my resume.
Right.
So
there's importance to that, but I think that there's also figuring out the right situation as well.
Getting crafty.
Getting crafty.
It's forced me to get clever with just myself.
Yeah.
So usually we have a quote at the end of the podcast, so I figured I could have you read this.
I'd be happy to.
So it's right down there.
Okay. I think there's something musical about noise, and that's attributed to Trent Reznor.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.